the heartbeat of the city, madness swirls. Echoes bounce off concrete dreams lost and found. Battles fought in alleyways, revolution sound. Green and gray skyscrapers watch without a soul. In the heart of Manila where stories unfold. Alex and Ivan cry out loudly for truth. Scream for justice like a thief, broken youth. Every word's a bullet tearing through the night. In this war of words.
And we are live. This is SITREP PH, the podcast on Philippine affairs and Filipino interests. I'm Ivan at home, coming to you live from the great city of Manila. My co-host, Inform PH, will not be in this week. So, President Marcos must start prosecuting treason now for the sake of the Republic's security. This, writes Dean Jemmy Gatdula of the Institute of Law here in the Philippines at the University of Asia and the Pacific for Business World this week. To quote Dean Jemmy Gatdula, we urge the Marcos administration, in the interest of national security, to investigate and prosecute anyone and everybody practically committing treason in the general sense of the word in our midst. This also comes this week as the noted constitutionalist and dean of the San Beda Graduate School in Manila, Father Aquino, writing on his social media that elements, agents, and servants of the People's Republic of China who have wormed their way into Philippine society should be sniffed out and exposed. Certainly, these are scary times and paranoid times here in the Philippines, as the country now is wondering who else could be a Chinese spy and who else could be an agent of criminal syndicates here from China. And so who better to discuss China's soft power and psychological warfare operations here in the Philippines and around the world than our guest for this evening, Mr. Charles Smith. Charles Smith became an noted investigative journalist in the 1990s, and his works have been featured on Newsmax and on AM Coast to Coast, and he has personally helped congressional investigations into U.S. relations with China. He is currently one of America's leading experts in cybersecurity and its implications for war, terrorism, privacy, and every way technology interacts with our lives. And he is also an exclusive columnist currently for Newsmax.com under Cyberwar as a cyberwar expert, and is currently president and CEO of Softwar, his own consulting company. So without further ado, welcome, Mr. Smith, to SITREP PH.
Thank you for having me on board. I appreciate it, and love the Philippines. I've had a long-standing relationship with the Philippines community. Used to have lots of fun over at the Philippine Embassy with several of the NGOs when we would go over there. So Philippine affairs, we know it.
Let's go, sir. So perhaps, just to start as an icebreaker, maybe you can tell us more about yourself and, an overview of your work, like what is Softwar, and you have a background in journalism and IT. Perhaps you can tell what made you transition from that and your work at Newsmax to, what you're doing right now online, which we will discuss later.
Okay, well, I started out as your typical IT guy back in the 1980s, before the fall of the Berlin Wall. So I was a Cold War baby. It was us, the Russians, and the rest of the world. I earned my classified clearance working for the U.S. Army on logistics projects. They recognized that I had some crazy abilities, so they brought me in on several other classified projects, some of which involved building war games for the Pentagon, as well as for encryption and secure communications. Now, this was pre-internet. Thank you very much. We built a worldwide network for the Army where they could literally communicate point to point with their computers and be able to not only move beans, butter, bullets, blood, but also communicate directly with each other in a secure fashion. So after that, as soon as the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union went down, I had to find a new gig. So I went to work for the Division of Motor Vehicles here in the wonderful state of Virginia in the United
Bruh.
States. You would think that would be a step down, but actually I was working with the FBI tracking stolen vehicles and making sure that police officers got the correct information on the road. So, whenever anyone got pulled over, if it was a criminal in a stolen vehicle, the officer would know beforehand before he even walked up to it. And obviously, that's the kind of thing that saves lives and it protects the citizens. That also got me involved in privacy and, again, security issues. So while I was doing that, a friend of mine approached me from my old defense days and said, "You'll never guess what we're selling to the Chinese." And I looked at him and said, "What?" And he says, "Well, it's military-grade encryption. Basically military grade secure communication systems." And I'm like, "Nah, that can't be happening." And he's like, "Oh, do a FOIA, find out for yourself." So he directed me to exactly which agency to issue a Freedom of Information request. And lo and behold, there was sitting on my desk was a bunch of documents dealing with members of the White House and of a company we know now today as Motorola, selling encrypted, secure radio systems to the Chinese People's Armed Police. Apparently, they had gotten a waiver, thank you very much, from the White House directly signed by then President Bill Clinton. So I wrote this up, much to the dismay of Motorola, noting that they were at that time taking hundreds of millions of dollars directly from a police unit, which was basically better known for beating dissidents and dragging them off to be executed. This is after Tiananmen Square. So I was approached by a member of the mainstream media at that point, one of the moguls. He ran WorldNet Daily. He's passed away since now. And basically what he said was, "Come and write for me." And I'm like, "I'm a programmer, okay? A po-jammer, as we like to refer to ourselves, all right? A coding monkey. You really want me to write? Well, I read your article. I liked it. I see a future need for information security and issues that revolve around that. Write for us." So I wrote for WorldNet Daily. He brought me in as a cub reporter. So I spent most of my 1990s roaming the United States, roaming the halls of Congress, and sitting in my office poring over FOIA documents, basically uncovering a massive amount of scandals, in particular between the Clinton administration and the then Chinese government, Jiang Zemin. Basically things like, well, I ran into a document once where there was the CEO of Loral Corporation. Loral at that time was a defense giant in the industry, a multi-billion-dollar a year company that produced missiles, infrared systems, tracking, radars, all sorts of things for the Defense Department. The CEO wanted to go see someone in China. So I checked the person's name, and it was Chen Rozhong. And he was listed as the civilian commissioner of a outfit called COSTEND, or the Commission on Science, Technology, and Industry for National Defense. So this is a Chinese organization. This guy is a minister who is working at that organization, and he wanted to meet with the chairman of Loral, and Bill Clinton approved it. Schwartz went in 94 and met with Shen, and there were documents from the meeting. And interestingly enough, the documents also showed things like slides of the military equipment that Loral offered, including Chaparral surface-to-air missiles, thermal tracking systems for drones and fighter jets, synthetic aperture radars, things like that. So I got a little alarmed with that. So I worked my way around and submitted another FOIA to the Department of Commerce, which had sponsored this meeting, saying, I want to know more about what took place there, and I also want to know anyone else that he met with. Well, they refused on the grounds of business privacy. So I sued them. Keep in mind, I'm not a lawyer, but I took them to federal court personally. And I stood up in front of a judge, Judge Robert Payne, here in Richmond, Virginia. I remember the man very well. Prior to that, I did some investigative work to find out who Shen Rozheng was. I called a friend of mine who put me in contact with a member of the Indian intelligence operations. And on the other side of the phone, a guy who I cannot identify said, oh, we know who he is. Give me your email address. I'll send you his full bio and maybe a couple of pictures. So as soon as I opened up my email, I was staring at a picture of Major General Shen Rozheng of the Chinese Army. So I printed all of that off and dropped it on Robert Payne's desk when I was sitting across from him, right next to the Commerce Department lawyers who are saying that he can't have this because this guy's a civilian. This is business privacy. We can't just let you have all access to those records. And I looked at the judge and I said, Your Honor, the man he was meeting with was not a member of the business community. His name is General Shen Rozheng, and especially his ballistic missiles. And I dropped the bio and the photos on his desk. Judge Payne read that for a very short period of time, from like about 15, 20 seconds, checked the picture, and then looked at the Commerce employees. And then for the next 5 minutes, there was nothing but, I've never heard this before, nothing but cussing. He actually threatened them on the spot with being put in jail for lying to him. Perjury, straight up fact. He blew his stack.
Dang.
He looked at their lawyers and said, I will throw you in my slammer right now unless you get all those documents on my desk by Monday morning. This was a Thursday, by the way. I, of course, kind of huddled over in the corner on my chair, making sure that I didn't catch any of the flames. But I tell you, he didn't look at me. He was livid because he had been lied to. He was told that this guy was a civilian, and I proved right to his face that, heck no, he wasn't a civilian. So in the end, the Commerce employees and their lawyers said, well, we can't just deliver these documents. Many of them are classified. You don't have a secured facility. Judge Payne looked at them and said, build one. I want to look at them Monday morning. So he reviewed over 1,000 documents and gave me 997. Those 997 covered details of a deal between the Chinese military and Loral Systems, sponsored by Bill Clinton, to pass basically advanced satellite technology that also involved ballistic missile operations. Things like how to deploy multiple satellites from a single bus. You also do exactly the same thing when you deploy nuclear weapons on the tip of a nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile. You have a bus that carries multiple bombs and it deploys them over targets. There were gruesome details of extremely sensitive and classified materials about missile launch equipment, encrypted controls, nose cone designs, engine designs, navigation, launch procedures, details like you would not believe, all of which were of not just civilian use, but were clearly for military purposes. And believe me, you know, if I was a general whose specialty was ballistic missiles, I'd be drooling over that kind of access. And Shen Rozheng was. Well, I uncovered who was running Costin, the commander, his name was Deng Hangao, again listed as a civilian minister. Well, Deng Hangao is actually General Deng Hangao, and he happened at that time to be a very good friend and have known for many years the Clinton Defense Secretary, William Perry. So all of this led to a massive number of documents that exposed basically the Clinton administration passing ballistic missile information for use of basically in nuclear warfare. I drug these documents up to Congress. I walked into the office of Dana Rohrabacher, who's a representative then from the state of California. Many of the defense groups that were listed in these documents actually were based in his district. So he had a vested interest in showing me the door. Instead, Dana looked at me, read the documents, and said three words, "Come with me." And he picked me up literally by the collar, and we walked downstairs into Representative Chris Cox's office. He was then running the intelligence chair for the House Republican committees. And Representative Cox was actually in a meeting with a bunch of people. He drugged me into that meeting and said, "Kick everyone out. This is important." So Cox went, "Okay, you guys get out of here." And they closed the doors, and then I laid out the documents and showed it to Congressman Cox. At that point, Congressman Cox went, "Okay, we're going to hold some hearings, and we're going to find out exactly what was going on."
And there must have been a massive political fallout from such a thing.
It was a massive scandal. The Clinton administration had basically moved ballistic missile, or in this case, satellite launch technology, over to the Commerce Department control from the control of the Defense Department and the State Department.
And
the hearings brought out that the three companies that I had highlighted in my documents, Lockheed, Hughes, and Loral, had basically conspired with the president to pass advanced military technology to the Chinese military involving advanced satellite deployment, missile launches, things like that. The result of those hearings, the Cox hearings, was the withdrawal of control from the Commerce Department and the formation of departments in both state and defense that would tightly regulate the control and export of this kind of information. The investigations by the FBI led to charges against all three companies. Loral, because of the details that I published, when I started, they were at $72 a share. By the time I'd finished, they were at 72 cents a share. They had to declare bankruptcy. Loral is now literally a very small rocket space satellite company that does exports mainly through the EU of international. They had to divest literally everything in their portfolio. The missiles, the radar tracking, the infrared, all of their multi-billion-dollar business went down the drain. Lockheed received a multi-million-dollar fine. Hughes was forced out of business by the Justice Department and had to sell its entire satellite business to Boeing, and everyone that was working at the division of Hughes space at that time was laid off and or fired, period, because of this.
So you clearly have a very wide and very experienced, background when it comes to dealing with the Chinese government. Before we actually start getting into Chinese statecraft and soft war, wait, perhaps you can tell us about what you're doing now, sir, because it says you're the president of Soft War, a consulting company. Well, what do you guys consult about?
Basically, I'm in information warfare, and one of the reasons why I moved back into IT was because I became disillusioned with journalism. We can go into that later. I went to work for Chris Ruddy over at Newsmax, and I was not exactly a happy camper. So let's be clear, though. Newsmax and WorldNet Daily and others, they're good outfits. Chris is a good guy, too. I just ran into one of those moments where I had a documented story about corruption, and they didn't want to publish it. So I said, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to IT. And that's what I did. And for the next, 20 years or so, I've been fighting hackers, writing encryption software, creating devices to create random number generation, which is extremely important when you're dealing with encryption.
And you still advise the U.S. government on these issues?
Oh, yeah. But I have also, because of the scandals that I got in with the 90s, I've made sure to keep my finger in that end. I've been told confidentially never to go to the mainland because the Chinese military is somewhat angered at me.
Who would have thought that those flip phones from the 2000s had a different story also through Motorola? And
oh yeah, well that leads me into during that time I met a lot of dissidents, and one dissident who was giving a nice lecture, I followed him up with the Motorola story in front of an audience, and he approached me afterwards and said, "Can you show me which phones?" And I'm like, "Okay, no problem." So I pulled out the documentation and we isolated the radios and the phones that the police were using. And it's like, yeah, I remember that one because the police beat me with it when they arrested me. and I'm like, oh, that's nice. So from then on, I was able to say that, Motorola radios are really tough. You can beat a dissident and they will keep on working.
The only thing that works better is than those Nokia brick phones.
Yeah, the Motorola threatened to sue me for that. I told them, go ahead. I would be happy to go into the courtroom with the documents I have and demand all of their documents that were involved in the exports. Never heard from them again.
And so before naturally China and that sort of stuff is going to be the main bulk of our conversation. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, as a noted cybersecurity expert, on what do you think of what's going on right now with the cloud strike? I believe that's what it's called. And so just initial reactions, will be brief about it. Like what's going on? Why is this not a cybersecurity attack? And why is it causing such a mess at the moment?
Anyone that's familiar with Microsoft should know better. Okay, it's not a cyber attack; it's a Microsoft update. Okay, Microsoft is notorious for not doing very good on their update capability. Windows 10, was a record holder. I date all the way back to the MS-DOS years. And basically, Microsoft is notorious for using their user base to quality test their updates. CloudStrike, you're working for Microsoft, little did you know, okay? And I have been at the other end of Microsoft stuff many times after an update and watching it disable all sorts of things that I didn't want it to do. And in various versions, okay? I can recall there was this major corporation I was working with at the time that happened to build jet engines for jet airliners, and they were greatly dependent on Microsoft Excel. Well, Microsoft issued an update and completely disabled the functions in Excel that this corporation was using, and therefore they could not produce turbine blades. So, you want to kick a multi-billion-dollar company in the rear end and knock it down? Yeah, take a Microsoft update without testing it out first locally. Most smart companies, what they will do is put a buffer, their own IT staff, between Microsoft and when they allow it to be issued to the computers that they use. Companies that don't do that suffer. And that's what we're having right now. CloudStrike should know better. They are an information security group. They do cloud security systems. They're very good at what they do, based in London. Unfortunately, CloudStrike issued an update that literally crashed Microsoft. And I understand that if you delete the CloudStrike file, there are instructions that are circulating around on X right now, you can reestablish yourself. But they've destroyed various systems around the world. And ironically, I just was notified by my wife, who had needed to do some, get her license renewed at DMV, that the Division of Motor Vehicles in the state of Virginia is down because
I bet they wish you were back there too, sir. I bet they wish you were there working.
I'd be standing there just like everyone else going, why do you guys do this? It's like, we keep telling you, put a buffer between them and the front line. Don't issue the update as soon as it goes out, because if you do, you're taking a risk.
Exactly.
Go with what's working. There's a acronym in information security, CIA, and it doesn't mean the intelligence agency. It means confidentiality, integrity, access. Information security is based on confidentiality. You want to make sure that you get the secure information and make sure to keep it secure. Integrity, it means to keep it secure and make sure that nobody's been changing it, having the audit trails and things like that, so you can look back and find out what's going on. And then access. The definition of perfect information security is when no one has access. You're taking a risk even if you have one person who's authorized to have access. It's just a matter of, you try to keep that threat window as small as possible. But the point is, if nobody has access, you got perfect information security. Even a hacker can't get in. So what good is your computer on the desk then, other than, a media player? Yeah, exactly. I can play solitaire on it. Okay, fine. So those are the three things that you have to keep in mind with any information security issue. And now in the future, when you look at these things that happen, don't jump to conclusions like it's got to be a hack. And at the same time, look at what's happening and who it's happening to. For example, this is fairly widespread. Airports, trains, DMVs, some companies.
And broadcasters.
Yes, and broadcasters, as well as individuals, but it's a fairly narrow box of tools, the Microsoft 365. If it's, say, against a specific company and nobody else, that's more likely a ransomware attack. We've seen that in the past, where they will lock up a system and download all the information off that system and then say, either pay the ransom or we'll delete everything. And again, encryption plays a major role from the criminal point of view. That's how they lock your information down. They encrypt it with their own key, and the only way to get it back is for them to give you the key.
Which they rarely will.
Theoretically, and in most cases they do, because they're more interested in getting the money than anything else. The criminal networks generally operate in two forms. I'll caveat that three. One is the talented amateur who just wants to mess things up. Two is the consummate professional who's in it for the money. He's probably closer to what you would think of as a mafia person. Okay, somebody who is just doing this for the money. And believe me, I've met many of those, and most of the hackers that are in that second classification wear a suit and tie. I'm not kidding. They're not the basement hacker. The basement hacker is category one. That's the guy's working in mom's basement, wears a t-shirt. They're very difficult to deal with because, you're looking at generally a male teenager who has no social life, who will work 48 to 72 hours straight
Just to
without
break
a
something.
break, right? Just to break into something. They don't go to sleep. They rarely, if ever, run to the bathroom, that kind of stuff. And the people that they're up against work 9 to 5, are planning for their retirement, and would prefer not to come back on at 2 a.m. when the break-in occurs. Okay,
Exactly.
so that's the fun part.
So,
And now
so I
there's the
guess,
third classification hackers.
yes, sir.
The third classification is your state-based hacker. They can be contract pros. The Chinese use those considerably, so do the Russians. Basically, they have a state-based aspect. They're in it for the information. They try to hide as best they can. You will not hear from them. They will generally not even want to be seen. Unfortunately for them, there are guys like myself who will sit there with a log, find out where they're at, and turn the hack around, and then sit there and hack into their system and then watch their chat as
That's
they're
amazing.
supposedly hacking into ours.
That's amazing. So naturally, this brings us to the main topic of our conversation, which is like soft power and soft war, which your consultancy firm is named after. So when you say soft power and soft war, what are we looking at here as an umbrella term? And is it a form of propaganda? Is it a form of warfare? And how do nations like China use it?
Information warfare is warfare. All warfare is based on deception. That's your basic Sun Tzu. If you want to be a good information warrior, first book you should read is Sun Tzu. If you want to study Chinese military and political operations, the first book you should read is Sun Tzu. They literally use that as a Bible to work from. Bottom line, as I have found out, information warfare can be as effective as real warfare, putting iron on targets. Case in point, when I went up against Loral, I was going up against a multi-billion-dollar corporation with factories that produced equipment around the world. By the time I'd finished, it was almost as good as if I'd hit them with bombs. Their company was gone. And it basically is a shell of its former self. They literally have no defense industry. Once you ruin someone's reputation, especially in the defense industry, as being unreliable and dealing with the enemy, nobody wants to buy from them.
Right.
And you drive them out of business. Well, if you drive them out of business, the factory closes, people get laid off, and all of that goes bye-bye. Now, if I took a B-52 and flew over America and dropped bombs on their factory at the same time and destroyed them, we would have made it a national imperative to rebuild those as rapidly as possible. But by using information warfare, I was able to eliminate them completely. And no effort to rebuild them, in essence, redistribute them to holders who would use it correctly. Now, I've done this to other companies, and another good way of pointing out information warfare was the famous Israeli hack of the Iranian nuclear facility. Again, in this case, a nice little hack, a bug created specifically by the NSA and the CIA, given to a contractor who walked in with a thumb drive, stuck it into a computer in the isolated system inside their nuclear reactor facility. And the net result was every last one of the centrifuges in there was commanded to more or less self-destruct. So billions of dollars of equipment and billions of dollars worth of uranium U-235, which they were processing, were rendered literally useless and unavailable. We completely destroyed hardware. You can destroy hardware with software. A lot of people don't believe that, but yes, nowadays computers control everything. Everybody believes it today. Back in the 80s, I had people look at me skeptically and say that, well, one of my jobs was working for Nixdorf, which is now part of Siemens, a German company. And a programmer gave me a program which was a head alignment program for mainframe disk drives. These are disk drive units that are about the size of a washing machine. Each one of them cost about $100,000. And he had made a miscalculation.
Did it make the disk spin too fast, or what had happened?
Well, basically, it was a head alignment program, and
Oh,
the lowest setting on the head alignment is 0, which means that you're right above the disk. Well, he managed to get it to compute to -1.
Oh, so it was crashing the disk.
So yeah, it actually took all the heads of the disk drive and plowed them directly into the disk. I got an immediate phone call from the computer room, said, that disk drive that you were messing with? Yeah, I see it's offline. What's the problem? Well, there's smoke coming out of the back and there's filings inside the box. And I went, uh-oh. So I checked the code, found the error, and then immediately went to the CEO. I just destroyed about $40,000 worth of equipment. I hope you don't fire me. And he looks at me and he goes, no, I'm kind of glad that you quality assured that. Okay. And so,
so like to make it more serious, so like the Chinese are, like, you're saying that like the Chinese are engaged also in similar sort of activities right now.
Oh yeah.
Like
these days the main targets are water, electricity, communications nodes, your banking and finance. Well, we've already probably suffered a major hack in banking and finance. You remember the flash crashes that were occurring back in the early 2000s, where literally one moment a stock would be way up, and then it would go literally to 0. And
it was the Chinese auto sellers that were causing that, bro.
Well, what was really happening there was basically a fake out. Okay. Right. What they were doing was faking like there were transactions, forcing it to crash a stock so they could buy it up at a very low level, knowing full well that it would bounce back very close to its original value, and therefore cash out before anyone noticed and make a ton of money. It was
when it comes to actual cyber attacks, like that would be the goal of a hostile state like the CCP, to not necessarily even the military targets, but they want the soft underbelly, like the economic targets, is what you're saying.
Everything. Anything of value is up on play. In the case of an actual open military operation, they want to jam the satellites in your communications. They would like to cause as much disarray behind the lines. They will definitely try to bring down the sea cables physically if necessary.
And there were examples of this already.
Oh yeah, there are a number of both subversive taps as well as offensive operations that have taken place that are fairly obvious. One of the least covered, and I do suspect that the Chinese were at the other end of this, was a thing called dual EC. This is in my area of specialty of encryption. Dual EC is elliptical curve. And it was a form of encryption introduced by the National Security Agency and was going to become a national standard. Unfortunately, and this is around the 2015 timeframe, and they were basically telling companies, we want you to use this if you ever want to get a federal contract. You have to use dual EC to encrypt your data. Well, one company called Juniper, which makes networking systems for major corporations, in other words, the routers, the switches, everything that takes your information and channels it everywhere, used dual EC. Well, one of the things that the NSA had quietly put in that dual EC code was a backdoor. Basically, it was a predictive analysis thing where they could predict your encryption code key and therefore be able to create their own code key and read everything you're doing. Now, Juniper supplied their equipment to companies involved in banking, international finance, government systems like Lockheed and Boeing, government agencies like the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, things like that. So the obvious intent there was they wanted to be able to sneak into anyone's system and take a peek. This was done under the war on terror started by the Bush administration, the second Bush administration. Dumbest idea ever. Basically, the idea here was they wanted to track terrorist financial accounts internationally, and they wanted to be able to break into things like banks in the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan through the FinCEN and the international banking system. And that's what started this. So they created this sneaky little backdoor in their dual EC code. Well, someone else found it. We don't know who in the Juniper systems. And what they did is they added 2 or 3 lines of their own code that locked the NSA out of their backdoor and created one for themselves. So now whoever this was, and it was a state actor, there was no question about it. It was a state actor, had a backdoor into American business and finance, the stock markets, Boeing, Lockheed, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, etc., internationally. And we suspect that they made use of that during the flash crashes to pull in some good money. That's why I suspect the Chinese, because they can never resist the dollar. And that's one of those cute things about how they work.
And so, well, what can state actors, like, what can states do to actually try to counter such things? And is the West prepared for such events? Because naturally, like, if things were to get hot between, rival states, they'll be targeting like everything is up for grabs, as you said.
Unfortunately, and for both sides, whether it be a totalitarian or non-totalitarian regime, neither side is very well equipped to deal with a major cyber warfare attack. Okay, the Chinese are extraordinarily vulnerable. They know it, and they're trying desperately to fix that. We are stupid. Okay, our federal government doesn't really do so well at this, as you can well tell. And sometimes our corporations, Microsoft, oh, excuse me, I was coughing there, sometimes don't do very well either. And that's mainly because it's always an after the fact issue. They very rarely prepare in advance. In fact, our national agencies like the NSA, the FBI, and others were more concerned with keeping powerful encryption out of the hands of regular civilians than they were of keeping it out of the hands of major international players and syndicates, cartels, terrorists. That was one of the things that I always used to jive them about was mathematics is universal, okay? And encryption is mathematics. Right. So your plan is to ban encryption here and pray that ISIS can't do math. That's not a plan. That's ridiculous. Yeah. Okay, the same thing applies in the state and international actors. And then even, when I present this to my companies, I look at them and say, listen, what you can do, you can't prevent everything, okay? And, if you think you need to be able to deal with the information that you've got, you have to deal with a state actor. We need to step up and grab the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA and say, okay, this is so secure, we need your help. On the other hand, if you want to keep the teenager from hacking you, you want to keep the mob from hacking you, you want to keep a Russian syndicate from hacking you, yes, you can do that. You can do it and stand a chance. You can at least minimize the risk. And you can also, at the same time, make sure that you have appropriate facilities to be able to circumvent if they do something. A good example would be several companies that have suffered ransomware attacks had backup plans, meaning they backed up everything. So when the ransomware hit and the guy says, we've got all your data and we've locked it up, you look at him and say, have a nice day. And you restore the backup and your systems are back in the air in no time. You're back online, right. You're back doing business. All right. So, a little common sense sort of helps.
And that's certainly what I hear from many people in the dev scene, is the idea that, a lot of these issues wouldn't be happening if people just have common sense, like downloading weird files from seedy websites or whatever.
Training your personnel is probably one of the biggest issues that most company faces. The very first one is the email. Okay. Don't respond to every email. And if it's something suspicious, like it's an email from your boss that says, I need you to cut a check for an outfit that you've never heard from, call your boss on the phone and say, did you actually send this to me? Don't just do it. And, if it looks suspicious, especially things with attachments, emails with attachments, those are always the way hackers get in. They send you an attachment with an important announcement, or you have a delivery, open this immediately, whatever. They try to pin your curiosity. It's a psychological warfare. Here we go again. And when you're dumb enough to do it, they're in. Case in point, very early on, Ukraine, but just before the Russians were going to invade back in like 2018, Ukrainian power company employees filled out their timesheets in Microsoft Excel. Microsoft Excel is actually responsible for at least 30% of the hacks globally. I'm not kidding, if not more. And the reason for that is Microsoft Excel has a way to bury code in a spreadsheet. So there's this employee, he gets an email that says, we have a new spreadsheet, fill this out for your time card or you don't get paid. So he filled it out and submitted it. Well, what he didn't know, as soon as he opened it up, it had a program on the inside that let the Russian hackers in. They grabbed a hold of the electrical grid and brought the power systems down in Ukraine. That was called black energy. It works. Okay. Microsoft Excel and Word are two of the most notorious, as well as PDF and zip files, those things. Anytime you get an email with an attachment from any of those, confirm from whomever they sent it, whoever it is, that you know them well and they actually sent it, because I can fake an email header. Now, there's also clicking on the unknown link. They have a link there. Click this link so you can, fill out your timesheet. Well, you never knew this person in HR who just sent that to you. Call up your human resources and ask them if that's real. If it's not, report it to your company. Get it spread around so nobody else does it. Recent events are very, obvious. If you open up an email, if one person opens up an email, it can cause a world of hurt for the whole company. Target, the famous retail box store, Target. Okay, they had a contractor who was working on their heating and lighting systems, and their heating and lighting systems were computer-based. So they ran through a network. Well, that network backbone also carried all of the encrypted terminals for your payment cards at the registers. So a hacker sent an email to one of the employees of that contractor with a backdoor in it. The employee opened it up. The hackers got in. They got passed through the backbone and got to the terminals, and then they were able to get the encrypted code keys for every customer that swiped a card. That was probably one of the largest multi-million-dollar hacks ever. And they made a bankroll on that.
Right.
Again, the credit card companies are going, oh, well, we'll cover it. No, the consumer covers that, whether you like it or not. And the only time that you can stop this as an individual is when you start pressuring your government and your representatives to pressure the insurance firms and the credit card companies to stop bending over for this and start implementing real good security that would prevent the issue. There were a number of ways of preventing that. Target, of course, lost millions on that deal, but hey, insurance is as insurance does. All right. So all they did is raise the price on some of their goods to pay for the extra stuff, and that was it. You, the consumer, you end up paying for it in the end. So when we finally get fed up, that's when the companies will change their tune.
And
So,
yeah, as we enter perhaps like the halfway point of our podcast, we already had a comprehensive discussion on actual like cyber attacks and more violent methods of information warfare. But perhaps, like, with your permission, we can go next to your work on Twitter, which is tackling the more subversive elements, the insidious mind games that the Chinese are playing with us. So I guess my first question is on this is, can you explain on us what your work on Quad, the Quad A10 on the X is and its main objectives? And because we've noticed you very active on X, you've got a lot of awesome accounts following you, open source intelligence accounts, and you've tackled a lot on China. So what is your work right now on X? And yeah, we can start from there.
Okay, well, one of the things about information warfare is again, as you can well tell, is it's partially psychological. If you can convince the other guy he's losing, even if he's winning, he loses. Okay, he'll fold up and walk away. If you convince that they're doing the wrong thing, or if you give them the wrong information and they believe it, you can down them. Basically. Now, one of the things that happens with information warfare is propaganda. That is actually part of PSYOPs, which again relates directly to information warfare. PSYOPs meaning, psychological operations. Information warfare in this form, as we discussed here, was, convincing an employee that timesheet he's looking at on the email is actually legitimate. Okay, that's psychological operations combined with information warfare. The basic rule when I'm working in X, and what happened, it was kind of like an accident. When I walked out there, and I've been out on Twitter since 2015, and I've watched the evolution of Chinese propaganda operations on X.
Right.
Where, it went from very small to extremely large to overwhelmingly large. And notice patterns, types, procedures, people who are spreading disinformation, and what kind of havoc that can cause. So I decided to do a concentrated study on this, and we also have the same thing occurring with the Russians, and they are basically referred to by my counterparts in Europe as trolls, because in their fight, it's elves versus trolls.
Right.
And there are several groups in Europe that do specifically that. NAFO is one very good example of a recent group. Well, I ran into a bunch of people on X who are also in the same vernacular as I was, observing this, trying to counter it individually, not making a lot of headway. And we decided to stick our heads together and say, well, what can we do informally? So we decided to form a all-volunteer group of anti-trolls. And in our case, our opposition is known as the Wumao. Wumao translates to 50-cent earner,
Yes.
okay, or 5 and dime, okay. Basically, the Chinese will contract out a lot of their information warfare propaganda, and they'll even go down to paying people up to 50 cents per post. And that's how you can make a living in a day. All right. So what we decided to do was counter their operations. And we also decided that we would take it one step further. X has a number of rules for engagement on their community. And we've noted that the Chinese posters, the Wumao, there are also other names for them like Little Pinks. Those are the ones that aren't paid. They would be violating rules for threats, for profanity, for hate speech, things like that, stuff that is really vile in many cases. So we began reporting them, and we would get them suspended. So we made it a game, more or less, to take them on one-on-one, or in our case, we'd start combining. And we started getting a little bit more organized with this, okay? So because we noted that many cases, the opposition that we were dealing with seemed to be funded, did our investigation, and as you've well noted, the Chinese fund their propaganda with about $4 or $5 billion a year at least. The online propaganda specifically aimed at X and Meta is probably closer to 1 billion total. Contractors are working out of Shanghai, Fujian, Wuhan, as well as real live PLA units who are involved in this, such as the ones that I've tangled with through, the information warfare. In our cases, that would be, we identify them by specific units, but they're also known as, threat groups.
And when you say that they're paid, how are you based on their Twitter accounts alone, based on their Twitter activity alone, how are you capable of making such assessments?
Well, basically when you see one or two guys who are being followed by official accounts who apparently are working at time, saying that they're not in China, but their time zones that they're posting match Beijing or Shanghai perfectly, that they're on literally in either a 9 to 5 or an 8-hour stint. You can basically identify a contractor by just looking at their hours of operations, their locations. You can also check by their quality. Generally, the better equipped ones from the point of view of having better English and better capability of negotiating around. Those guys are professionals, okay? They're being paid to be there. They're probably 91368 or one of the other main PLA units that operate. We actually identify they're literally right down to the building where they're at. Thank you very much. So, I've got pictures of them from space, so that irritates the living daylights out of them when I'm post okay, you're running from this skyscraper, I can tell.
So who do you really target when it comes to these concentrated efforts? Is it the big boys, or is it the little
both?
Both accounts?
Okay. There are two basic types, and there's the small accounts, which not a lot of people pay attention to. They're posting into nether space. Nobody's really hearing what they're saying. They're generally reposting what's coming out of the official sources. And then we'll also target the official sources, the diplomats, the propaganda outlets, Global Times, Hu Jintao is the editor there. Chen, who's one of the big guys out in Europe. We used to target Li Zhang until he got moved, and that was partially our fault. Basically, what you can do, you got to understand, okay, these guys are living in a totalitarian regime. You can tell a real live Wumao because he doesn't have the capability of making or issuing pictures or memes, because they don't give them access to Google. They don't give them access to software where they can make that kind of stuff, and they frown on it.
It's literally just the angry guy like tweeting in a mix of Chinese characters or like English at you, because like they don't know what memes are. They don't even know what meme culture is, right?
Right. And they're under-equipped. So if generally those are also throwaway accounts. In some cases, we've identified individuals who've had as many as 80 or 90 farm accounts. And remember, again, they're a contractor. Let's put it this way. Your government offers you 50 cents a tweet. Okay. So you set up 20 computers with bots on them where you can issue a general command to one, and all 20 of them will start posting garbage.
That's why they all look the same. That's why they all look the same. Like you'd suddenly see a bunch of people replying at your anti-China post, and it's the same tweet or it's the same pattern of tweeting.
Exactly. Now you're a contractor working for the Chinese government doing this, and you want to make money. So doing it individually at 50 cents a tweet, you'll earn just enough to buy bat soup. You do it with 500 computers sitting in an office, you're going to make a tidy sum. Remember, they're not invulnerable to corruption, even against each other. And that's something that few people follow with. So these guys who are doing that also do things on the side.
I want to jump on what you said earlier, because it's the idea that people aren't immune from corruption, and they're willing to do it even against each other. Have you been monitoring like Wumaos coming from places outside of mainland China? So like I know the Indians, for example, have this fear now in their media about how local communists or local Chinese sympathizers are being paid to spread propaganda. And certainly that's the same thing here in the Philippines. We're like, there's rumors of people being paid large sums to undermine the local state. So have you guys been monitoring that too, like foreign Wumaos?
Oh, exactly. It is a generalized pattern. It's part of their intelligence operations. It's in the Philippines, it's in France, it's in England, it's here in the US, it's in India, and here in the United States, it even gets worse from the point of view that we have members of the community on X who are working for the People's Security Bureau, or MSS, and they will identify dissidents who are making posts, some of whom are actually inside China, and they will try to track them down, either inside or outside of China, and then they will pass that information directly to the Chinese security services, who will mobilize operations globally in your country, in my country, on your territory, and on my territory. We have Chinese agents who are being directed by information obtained from these agents on X of dissidents inside your homeland. And what they will do is they will assign an agent or agents to pressure them, to threaten them, to harass them, even kidnap them off of your soil. So this war is literally a real live war. We're not talking about, it's just, you're posting. No, there are people who are being hurt and dying because of this.
And what would be the things that they would be posting about? Perhaps we can get specifically into the content, because you talked about demoralizing a population to make them more susceptible to Chinese influence or whatever, or like what are the common themes that you're monitoring? What are the common talking points when it comes to your classic Wumao?
No, I think that a good example would be the current events today in the Philippines. The very first thing that they will say is that Philippine territory is not Philippine territory, it's Chinese territory, even if it happens to be 400 miles away from the Chinese coast.
Right.
and they base their claim on made up, literally, in some cases, literally either lies they make up then or made up information provided by their government of historical basis, where some Chinese sailor 1,000 years ago stepped off his boat and took a leak on the sandbar, and therefore that sandbar is now Chinese territory forever. Okay, bottom line is they will again attack. They will say that it's not Chinese territory. They will make every use to say that the Philippines is a dog of the United States and that your government is just doing what Washington is telling them. And I'm sitting here looking at Joe Biden going, if Joe Biden is talking to them, he might not even know, they're from the Philippines, much less what their name is. So don't look at us. My government is weird enough as is to add a conspiracy on top of it, saying we're telling you that you need to be defensive about your own territory. In fact, this administration has discouraged it.
And it's more telling when you see like local Wumaos do it, because naturally you would know that the average like Filipino, the average American generally is a very patriotic person. But like the NSC, the local National Security Council here pointed out that a lot of these individuals and even like large accounts would be repeating word by word Chinese talking points from the embassy. They'd be repeating the Chinese embassy talking points. And so it makes you question, where did an average Filipino or an average like French guy or an average insert nationality here be getting these, if not from their local Wumao handler? Is this what you've been monitoring too?
Yes, and we do work our way up the chain. We refer to the handlers as honchos. In our game, instead of being trolls versus fairies or whatever, we've actually designed our operation around aircraft and military flight ops, and that seems to work out very well. We work in teams, usually of 2s or 4s. We have a flight lead and we have a wingman. The Wumao operate in cells. What they will do is they'll have a single cell of multiple end users, generally low-level followers, being commanded by what we refer to as a honcho account. A honcho is one who disperses the information, that pulls the command and says, issue it now. Do keep in mind, again, even the official guys, the ones who are working for the PLA, the diplomats and others, will frequently moonlight on the side. And sometimes that's even encouraged. By moonlighting, I mean, you will see them talk about investing in cryptocurrencies, gambling, pornography. They will do follows to those types of sites and encourage their followers to go to those sites. That's because they get paid for that in addition to posting. So a good example, one way to especially identify a Wumao, look at his follower list. If he's following porn, he's very likely a Wumao. Okay, and the reason for that is that porn is actually illegal in China, supposedly. And once they're released on these Western social media sites, these guys really get extraordinarily curious.
Bro.
Yes. So I think we even noted that with one of the people that you had illustrated for me that fits the Wumao perfectly, because he echoes the diplomat talking points. Well, we checked his account and immediately found that he loves following a lady who is known to beat and tie up her clients. Okay, so that's a little perverted, to say the very least. A mistress.
Right.
So, when you confront them online, bring that up. Generally, they will get very defensive about that.
So there's a streak of perversion in the Wumao, because unlike many people in the West, which would have a sense of experimentation during their teen years, these guys just go wild when they're exposed to the Western internet, basically.
Yes, and then there's the other aspect of doing it is, and some of them are also promoting it because they make money from people who sign into those accounts. They get
Well,
information from people who sign into those accounts.
are you saying that maybe organizations like OnlyFans or like, you know, the Hub or something may be paying, like implicitly be getting referrals from Wumao, and there's like an implicit, you know, exchange of cash or subscription or whatever taking place?
Well, what they do is they will obtain the information one way or the other of who when, what are you looking at. Again, psychological warfare. And they also have their own accounts of a number of people. You know, look, believe it or not, you know, there are prostitutes on X, and they do sit there and pose nude and sell those pictures. Well, they get your account number, your IP address, and then you'll get a little letter or an email.
They blackmail you. They blackmail you
Right.
saying like, you've been on this account, you slept with this whatever, and now we own you.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, it's called the honeypot, and that's one way of being able to do that. And let's say you're a government official and you have access to secure information. They may not ask for money. They may ask for worse. Okay. So that's the kind of operations. Now, keep in mind that this is a dual-edged sword. As I pointed out, when you bring it up online, hey, you follow all these porn accounts. Why should we be talking to you? Because I question your judgment. Because honestly, you know, does your wife, does your business, does your party know that you're violating the law? You know, communists frown on pornography and abuse of this kind of stuff, and especially the Chinese communists. And I'll give you two good examples. Xiao Lijiang, who was the former spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, we nailed that he had followed and then liked a bunch of gay porn sites on
Whoa.
X. Yes, we supplied that information quietly to the several members of the press whom I know from my journalist years, and it got published. It's actually out there. Well, suddenly, Li Zhao was pulled from his post, and he is now running a backwater desk in, I think, the South China Sea Geographic organization in China. In other words, they pulled him from his headline spot. And you can see Xiao, Z-H-A-O, on many of the old posts. He was a real handsome young man, and he was married. I understand from the rumors that we picked up after we got the information put out that he was following gay porn, that his wife got very upset with him and beat him up in public. And that embarrassed his employer, the foreign ministry. Well, this is only one circumstance. There is also a diplomat from Australia, a diplomat from China to Australia. His name is Long Ding Ben, the general consul to Perth. We caught him peddling kiddie porn.
Whoa.
Okay. Right. Reported him to X, and X suspended his account. He's literally the only diplomat that's ever been suspended. They literally suspended his account. You can look for Long out there. You'll find some evidence of him. I had plenty of photos of him and the follow accounts that he had. He followed an extensive array of porn. We found multiple diplomats from the Chinese embassies around the world, Japan, India, Pakistan. I haven't checked the Philippines. I'll have to look.
I remember Mr. Zhao Lijiang. Like, yeah, no wonder they replaced him with the woman now, because like this guy was active regularly. He was one of their best like wolf warrior diplomats with the inflammatory remarks.
They have whole sites dedicated to him. The women followers were just swooning every time that he came out and issued his propaganda. Goodbye.
He's gone.
Yeah, well, long ding ding. I'd like to see if anybody can even get a meeting with that guy in Australia. I'm still wonder if he's even there. There was the ambassador to Zimbabwe. He actually followed, sex videos, porn. And I post that one as a frequent. They pulled him from Zimbabwe and took him home. He's now a council in Beijing, and that's it. And I haven't heard from him since.
What would compel an individual, a local Wumao, because naturally here in the Philippines, we're shocked every time we see a local, retard just repeat Chinese talking points, because it's against our nature as a patriotic people. And so is this pure mercantilism? How many people, because I talked to local experts on this too. So the question is, how many people do you think are the true believers and actually believe in this nonsense because they back Duterte, or they read too much People's Daily, and how many people are actually paid?
Well, that's where I got into the two types of warriors: the actual physical Wumao, who are contractors, and then there's what we refer to as the little pinks. Those are the patriots who are very much into communist ideology, Marxism, socialism. Generally, they believe and adhere to those ideologies. Again, and when you're talking about external to China itself, I would say at least 50%, if not more, are little pinks. They are actually members of the local communist groups and supervisors. Some of them are state paid, but very few, because it's much more difficult. We've seen that in actually paid members in Singapore more often than not. And that's because it's easier for them to be able to siphon funding.
And I recall the Singaporeans have recently started cracking down on this side of nonsense because they're trying to actively influence the Singaporean government.
Yes, and in our cases, we've noted literally bot farms. In other words, these are professional outfits. You don't see an individual mount themselves up with 1,000 cell phones.
Right.
That's not something that most normal people would do. On the other hand, a money-making outfit that's charging per post and also using it for other nefarious purposes. There are ways of scamming advertising by faking a large number of activity on an ad, and therefore they get paid for that.
And I guess the real question is how effective are these operations? Because you mentioned, for example, Ukraine and the Russian efforts, and it would appear that the idea that Ukraine is losing that war is starting to seep its way both in the extreme left and in the extreme right of the West. And so how about Chinese efforts specifically, sir? Are they having a desired effect? Are they being rebuked by the local targeted audience, or what are they gaining out of this?
In particular, a good example is the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea, and China claiming virtually that's their entire territory. That's where the current fight is going on. And of course, it's a ridiculous argument on their part. It's based on, what previous empires used to have or laid claim to, not the PRC itself. That's kind of like the current Spanish government saying that everything that the Spanish Empire owned in the 1500s is still ours.
Well, we just say to people that we own this place because the Pope said so. So that's our counter to them.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't think that Manila would recognize Spain saying that the Philippines is still Spanish territory. We claim it. That's just not going to happen. They're not going to recognize the United States if we said that. Even though the propagandist guys are saying, oh, well, you fought a war with them and you held them as a territory. And it's like, Yeah, and then after we fought side by side in World War II, we said enough is enough. You can be whatever you want. You want to be a state, be a state. You want to be a country, be a country. And
Right.
you're a young nation, and we respect that. And we also have, I have personal feelings for that because, my father was in the Pacific Theater, and he fought side by side. And we defeated fascism and the Imperial Japanese, and it was a very rough and tough battle all the way through from island to island. And again, the Chinese are trying to break those kinds of links. They're trying to break down with their propaganda, and some of it's ineffective. And one way to tell a professional from a pink, a professional, he's reporting to usually a Politburo, a Wumao member who pays his bills. That means that he has to make posts that pleases the boss. Generally, the home Chinese propaganda is Maoist 60s era grade. It is terrible.
It's like
Rotten.
the terrible like posters. You remember this old anti-American posters during the Cold War, and it's the same thing. It's just cartoons on the Global Times, and that's meant to be funny.
Right. And, it's very poorly done, but it pleases the boss because it plays at home. So he writes you a check. Your little pink, on the other hand, he's hardcore. He's going to, cite anything and lie about everything. Well, America killed millions in the Middle East. Untrue. Okay. Your war on terror, you're bombing everybody right now. And I'm like, okay, can you name a location that is currently suffering bombs other than, say, the Houthi, who are pirates who are raiding ships at sea?
We're the next Ukraine. You can name the Wuma talking point. The Philippines is the next Ukraine being pushed by imperialists.
Right. Well, and, even with the Ukraine thing, as you've seen with the Russians and the Chinese saying, well, Ukraine is losing. And as I recall, there was an 80-mile convoy headed to Kiev when this started out. That convoy got decimated. And since then, they've been fought to a standstill and pretty much moved out. And the Russians are trying to do things like, mobilize World War II era tanks because they've run out of tanks. So, obviously, I don't see the world in the same light that they do, in both in the political and the fashion. A good example of how to trigger one of these guys is tell them China is not communist, and it isn't.
It isn't.
It's no longer a socialist state. No.
No.
Let's look at it in these terms. One, they have personal property. Two, they have billion-dollar corporations with billionaires who run them. 3, there is a one-party state with a dictator. And 4, they have this xenophobic fascination with Han domination and a desire to restore an empire lost 1,000 years ago. And because of that, they feel the world has done them wrong.
Is this basically what it is, sir? It's the restoration of the Middle Kingdom, because we were having this conversation before with the other geopolitical experts here, and it's the idea that China is a rising power attempting to assert hegemony in this area, and so like the Psy War is simply an aspect of their hegemony.
It is, but your definition of the Middle Kingdom is not quite right. Let's follow this again. 1939. Personal property is okay. Billion-dollar corporations with individuals owning them. One-party state. Dictator for life. A xenophobic command who's based on race and thinks that they lost an empire and therefore the world has wronged them and they have to get it back. What does this sound like?
the Nazis.
Right? Exactly. China is a fascist state.
It's a fascist state. It's not even an imperialist state. It's a fascist state.
It is a fascist state.
Right.
It has degenerated, as predicted by many people who study socialism and Marxism, and how it degenerates generally into a fascist or single-party dictatorship type of operation. What we're witnessing now, especially with the racial aspects, you recall their foreign minister at one point, yes, suggested that the Korea and China and Japan and others get together in an Asian only group based on race. Okay, it is the Han domination of the CCP is a racial thing, and we see that it is applied inside their country, like the oppression of the Uyghurs. And the Cantonese.
The cultural genocide too, the way that they would actively suppress like Tibetan institutions or even like Uyghur religious belief. And the Cantonese, like you mentioned, the Cantonese. That's interesting.
Yeah, they think they also think of them as subhuman, and Hong Kong. You'll see that generally with the Little Pinks, especially. They refer to them much like they refer to the Taiwanese as frogs.
Oh, they really messed up Hong Kong, man. They really messed up that place.
Yeah, and exactly. And anywhere they touch, it's going to happen exactly that same way. Xi Jinping is a dictator for life, period. His only basis to be alive is to be in power. He is quite willing to fight a war, even lose hundreds of millions of lives in his own country, as long as he stays in power. Doesn't matter. So Harvard wrote a nice little study about Chinese business operations and how closely they resemble mafia operations. And that, again, falls quite well into place with the fascism. There's levels of corruption. Generally, most of their leadership is either on the take or taking money off the books.
There's this incestuous relation between the state and big business.
You're right. And we've seen Xi Jinping try to correct that, like with his recent purge of the PLA from the top down. He has accusations of Chinese generals and their missile forces siphoning off fuel for resale on the open market.
And to make hot pot.
Yeah, well, that's just part of it. And of course, it also, if you look carefully, the head of the Chinese National Shipbuilding Company was also indicted and jailed because he had built in major levels of corruption and bribery, kickbacks in the construction of their aircraft carriers. So that's endemic in their culture, unfortunately, and that's been explained to me more than once.
Why do you think their efforts are not working, sir? Because you see the latest, I don't know about other countries, but you see polling here in the Philippines, and if anything, within the last half year or to a year, the unpopularity of China is on an all-time high. 91 to 93% of the electorate doesn't trust them, and the trust in the Americans has been solidified from a low under Duterte. Well, why do you think they're failing? Is it a lack of Western sarcasm? Is it the fact that they don't know the audience? Is it too sloppy? Well, why aren't they effectively swaying opinion here in Manila?
Well, I frequently say this with a tongue-in-cheek. They just need to study Madison Avenue and find out how to advertise correctly.
Yeah.
The reality is they put on two faces, and you'll see this every day. There is one face that is smiling, is friendly, is telling you that we're a great place to visit. Come and do business with us. Bring money. And then there's another face that says, we hate you. We want your territory. We want what you've got, and we will kill you to get it.
It's the same thing with the Wumaos, because they would say, like, China is our friend. China is a trading partner. And also, China will destroy us if we don't give them what they want.
Right.
So that
And when you get that kind of duality in a message, after a while, you look at them like, you've got to be nuts. All right. People just do not do business with crazy. You've got to be steady about this kind of thing. And of course, that the misinformation and the lies compound themselves. A good example is in the financial networks. The business network people finally caught on after they started doing audits that these guys were badly inflating their assets and sales in an effort to get you to invest. The reality was they were just a mere shell, and they wanted to steal your money.
And technology, and they would
Right.
take Western tech.
That's part of the deal. If you want to cut a deal with us, we need to know how to do this.
Right.
One of the documents that I got from the Clinton years, wonderful story. The CEO of Chrysler Corporation made a deal with China to have Jeep Cherokees manufactured in China. And after about 6 months and the negotiations finished and they transferred most of the technology, he decided that he would go over there and pay them a visit. So he went to Beijing, and as he was driving through the streets of Beijing to head to the headquarters of the auto firm where he made the business deal with, he saw a number of Jeep Cherokees on the street, except they were all illegal copies.
They weren't Chrysler. They were local brands.
Right. They were illegal copies.
Bro.
So the very first thing he did is he brought this up with the CEO of the company that he had made the deal with. I just drove through your streets and I see illegal copies of what we just sold you. I'm not getting paid for that. What's going on? The CEO looked at him and said, you should be proud of us. That actually proves how far we've come along in being able to manufacture autos.
Whoa, it's so blatant, and I thought they'd like be evasive. It's that blatant. They would just say, yeah, we took your tech.
Yeah, we took your tech, and we made illegal copies. We're making money on it. You should be proud of us, because
and that's the reason that's the reason these companies are moving to a place like India, right? Because like there's no legal system for which you can sue these people.
There's no way you can get your money back. And people have found that out time and time again. Investors, we have major investors like Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and others who put money into Chinese corporations from retirement funds, and people who would be investing in there didn't even know their money was being sent to China, and then they lost the money.
And so you're saying that money is leaving China right now, not specifically, but you're reading it in the news, like there's capital flight, and part of it is also it's just a crappy place to operate, not just because of the Trump and Biden pressures being applied on them.
Oh yeah, that's the whole point. In fact, right now there's a big scandal going on with the audit firms. And they're actually having to downsize themselves because the audits that they did were so fakey and so badly done, they got caught. When you're auditing a metal company and you say that they have $100 million of assets in nickel and copper as part of their inventory, and then you go out there actually to their factory and find a pile of maybe a ton of scrap sitting in the back, you've just been taken for a ride. And so, when you lose money on the Chinese stock market as an individual, somebody took you for a ride. The guys at Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and others made their money because they make the money on the trade. They take a percentage. They make money whether you win or lose. So encouraging you to invest, even in a cheap outfit, still makes them money. So they were happy to do that until they got caught.
Right.
Now we have motions here in Congress, and a good example is like Trump during his years. The very first thing he did is he instituted a ban on investments in companies in China that were military operations. Norenco, Polytech, places like that make weapons that point back at us. And therein lies, I think, one of the rubs. a lot of people got upset in Wall Street because they wanted to make money. We have people here in the US and around the world, globalists, who don't care if they build weapons that kill us, who don't care if they use slave labor to make tennis shoes. They don't care. They just want to make money. When you finally uncover those people, information warfare, then it embarrasses them. People do not want to do business with them. People do not want to invest in them or their companies or buy their products.
And that, yes, continue.
That's how we work.
Right.
And, you know, that's what we do with the Quad A10. We do that on the counter propaganda, uncovering and promoting operations from both dissidents here and dissidents abroad who note, you know, this company is using slave labor. These guys are tearing down mosques. These guys are ripping up Tibetan schools. We publish that. We post that. We make sure the world knows it. We also pull the pants down on the diplomats. This guy's following kiddie porn.
Bro, yeah.
And we also expose the individual Wumaos, whether they be pinks here or abroad or inside China, and tell people, don't follow them, don't listen to them. All they do is throw acid bombs. They don't give you information. They insult, they threaten, they cajole, they will tell lies continuously. And after a while, people start looking at what we're posting and what they're posting, and they start following us.
And it's a good thing that you mentioned earlier about the Trump administration, because that's where I actually want to end this now. Would you say that, I mean, based on your post, you're more of a conservative, more Republican leaning in your politics, right? Or not necessarily?
I'm actually not a Republican, although I would not vote for the Democrats from my lessons learned through the Clinton years, watching the levels of corruption and kickbacks. There were members all the way up to the Secretary of Defense who took kickbacks. All right. They were paid money that came from the Chinese military.
And so the question coming here from Manila is basically, since you seem to be enthused also based on your Twitter post about the Trump campaign or about removing Mr. Biden, what would a Trump administration look like when it comes to dealing with China? Naturally, we know that that Biden is simply continuing Trump's old policy, which is branding China as a strategic enemy and a strategic competitor. And so how will the Trump administration go? Because depending on where you are in this political spectrum, you know, there's some people here in Manila that would be welcome it. There's some people, even respectable scholars, which are more with the Brookings crowd that would be against it. So how would it be like?
Well, the era of engagement, which is what Clinton started, is dead. The engagement is off. Okay. They call it decoupling. I refer to it as divorce.
Divorce.
Yeah. We were married to a toxic partner here. The guy says on one hand, I love you. And then the next day he beats you in the face. China beats the kids. They steal stuff and they pick fights with their neighbors. You don't want to be married to anybody like that. Okay. You don't want to be associated with a country like that. You'll see a continuation of that policy. I've seen some posts about his recent comments on Taiwan. Trump is a businessman and a negotiator. He looks at the government like it's a business firm, unlike the Brookings crowd and the others who are academics who think of it like it should be run like a college class. Those guys are they're not practical from the point of view that they've never really done this before, and you can see that with the Biden administration and how they've messed things up from the word go. Expect him to be a tough negotiator, but don't expect him to give up on certain things. Right. His comments on Taiwan, that's basically aimed at the negotiating. Taiwan only provides 2.5% of their GDP to defense. That's too low.
And
NATO,
this was a position that even someone like Elbridge Colby, which is a senior Republican uh, defense strategist, would say, like, if this is an existential problem, then why isn't Taiwan spending enough? And that's, I guess, that's the same thing with Ukraine, right? Because it's like, if this is existential, then why aren't the Europeans meeting the 2% defense target?
yes, exactly, and that's why NATO. Many of the NATO allies are irritated with Mr. Trump because he would look at him and say, "Put up, okay? You guys agreed to this amount of money, and a lot of you are underfunding it by a big margin, and looking at us to make up the difference. Start putting up for your own defense. The Russians are on your border, not ours." Okay, and this is specifically like looking at the Germans, for example. So expect him to be a tough negotiator, even with our allies, but at the same time, don't expect him to be any softer on China. He's already proposed a 60% tariff on all of their imports. This is going to crush their economy. All right. And don't expect him to be any less of a businessman with our Defense Department. Our Defense Department wastes a terrible amount of money. He would like to see them become a lot more efficient and a lot more effective. So there's going to be a shakeup there. And believe me, I come from a kind of mindset where I've never seen a weapon I don't want, and at least 100 for my own military. And I'm talking about, a B-2 bomber priced at over $1 billion. Well, you can't really do that. You got to be smart by how you buy these things. And you've also got to be able to deal with the threats that are available and are there. I think the Chinese are running a bigger information campaign, and this is something on the defense side that I want to point out. Right now, they are thumping their chests. They are beating the drum, firing water cannons at Philippine ships, confronting your guys on the sea with machetes and knives. It's almost a shooting show. They want you to take a shot at them is what they're trying to do, so they can go, "Oh, we're the victim here." The same thing on the Indian border and others. But what you don't see, what's not happening in the background is we're not seeing the kind of mobilization, the kind of operations that would be required. I know a lot of defense analysts disagree with me, but the purge is the key. You don't start a major war after purging over 100 of your top generals. It's not really a good idea.
And so they can't even afford a war. It's not so much like, are they willing to fight a war? They can't afford it.
Well, true, because I'll give you an example. I've been confronted with this before. All right, well, we'll just blockade Taiwan. Well, my response is, we'll blockade you. Well, we'll sink your ships. How are you going to sink my ships if I don't come in range?
You just close the Straits of Malacca, and a lot of China's food imports and oil imports will just vanish.
And all the exports will vanish. Yes. Okay, well, then I get that we'll just get oil from Russia over a rail line, and to which I laugh. You know how many rail cars one tanker is? It's like 2,000.
There's no infrastructure.
There's no way to do that. And the cracking facilities are in Shanghai. How are you going to get them there? All right, fine.
Are they acting this way because they sense weakness from Washington? Is that the bottom line? They sense weakness in Washington, right?
That is one of the reasons. The other reason is Sun Tzu. I'll return to the start. If you are weak, appear strong. If you are weak, appear strong. If you are strong, appear weak.
So this is paper dragon. This is paper dragon nonsense. They are simply a paper, like the way many Westerners would have feared the Soviet Union back then, before Reagan proved that it was just a starving bear. That's the same thing. That's what's happening in China now, in your opinion.
Yeah, the Chinese army, the PLA, is not 10 feet tall. They're not very well equipped. They're more designed for controlling people at home. That's the only people they've fought since 1979 has been their own civilians. And they have, very poor training, very thin NCO. Okay, they're sergeants. their chiefs very, very thin, extraordinarily thin. And
That's common for communist regimes and
right,
for totalitarian regimes because they expect direct orders from the top. There's no room to
yes, they
maneuver.
are very, very pyramid structure. And therein lies a part of their weakness is if you cut those command and control lines from their troops freeze in place because they are schooled very heavily. You follow orders or do nothing. And
Right.
in other words, improvise, adapt, overcome. No, that is not the word.
No.
Okay, you don't do that. Even their fighter pilots, for the most part, are not. They're under the direct control of a controller who will tell them where to turn and when to shoot.
Bro.
And I'm sorry, our guys are not that way, and that's one of the basic differences between how free people fight and totalitarian people fight.
And so basically, a lot of this rhetoric with Trump, in your opinion, the fact that like we're gonna negotiate in Ukraine or we're going to demand that Taiwan and other countries pay, this is simply him being a businessman. But if push comes to shove, he will not renege on Western commitments.
He's not going to renege on Western commitments, and he's more than aware that losing Taiwan would be a major blow to the West and to the Western economies worldwide.
And the Philippines, though, how much belief do you have that the United States will assist the Philippines? I know they're already offering us now. We've refused so far, but if push comes to shove, there's fears in Manila of how much commitments Washington has if the MDT is activated.
If Biden is in office, don't expect much.
Oh,
if Trump is in office, expect a phone call from him to your president with a few words. It's the same thing he said to Modi when the Indians were attacked. What do you need?
oh right. And so you see, I find this like odd because you're an individual that's been active in defense and in government, and you have this view thinking that Trump would be a more powerful leader, and yet you have the academics that we mentioned, even many here in Manila, who would view Trump with trepidation and even contempt, thinking that he's not going to commit, he cares for himself only, he's a Machiavellian, like if the Philippines has nothing to offer, and it feeds into a lot of the Wumao narratives. You're saying like to start wrapping things up, this is wrong. A Trump administration would have full commitments to Manila.
Oh, absolutely. And there is no question. And as I pointed out, when the Chinese attacked the Indians in the Himalayas, he picked up the telephone, called Modi that very day and said, "What do you need?" Well, and
that's
Modi
that's a non-treaty ally. That's a simple economic partner.
Exactly.
Do that.
Exactly. And Modi said, "Well, we could use some smart artillery shells and a lot of your information from your satellites and your intercepts." And we gave it to them, and we've been giving it to them ever since. I mean, one of the satellite photos, signals, intercepts, all of that. And we've actually formed a much better bond. The Biden administration kind of pulled back on that because they
have the human rights in Kashmir. They went hard on the human rights.
They used that as an excuse. They actually, because of the CIA, has relations with the ISS over in Pakistan. They'd like to reestablish those.
So this is exactly what the Indian conspiracists would say. Like you hear this in their talking points saying that America does not want to let go of its abusive relationship with Pakistan. They want to reestablish it, despite the fact that they've been snaked so many times by those guys.
Well, let's put it this way. Under the Trump administration, Pakistan was listed as a terrorist operation.
Yes, I remember that.
Exactly. And we cut off all military aid and equipment. When Biden came in, he pulled that.
And he lost Afghanistan too. That was an ISI operation.
Exactly. All the way across the board. The CIA and the ISI have been working for a long time. They're buddy pals. They have money off the books. I'll be honest with you. Okay, we have corruption here. One of the corruptions is at Langley. It's the CIA. I don't get along very well with Langley.
Near where you are, near where you are.
Yeah, very, very near. Okay, and they during the Afghan war, the Defense Department approached the administration, then the Bush administration, and said, we would like to spray the poppy fields and knock down the money that's going into the Taliban. The CIA nixed that. Their excuse was a lot of the money goes to the ISI in Pakistan, and if they don't get their money, then they're going to fall, and those nuclear weapons that Pakistan has will go to the terrorists.
You hear this from the Indians. They lament the way that the Americans seem to fall for this, because Pakistan acts like the madman with the gun, threatening to shoot himself if you don't give him stuff in his begging bowl. And so you sympathize with that, with what the Indians are saying.
We could have eliminated the opium traffic globally and overnight, and we did not. We never did. And that was because the CIA would not allow it. And you can see that because we never sprayed the poppy fields. We had total control of the air. Total control. But we never did that.
You didn't need to actually just control the place. You can, like you said, just use, like, you can spray it to destroy it.
We actually developed defoliants that were opium poppy specific. They wouldn't hurt anything else but the opium poppies.
Well, sir, that we've had a very fruitful and very interesting discussion so far, and we'd like to thank you once again for coming here. And we hope you can show up. We hope you can come again on our show if and when Mr. Trump wins as president, so that we can talk about the fallout from that.
Yeah, come back and review it.
Yes, of course.
Don't expect to see any war, but expect them to continue to push at the edges, places where you get soft. That's where they go.
So, Mr. Charles Smith, thank you once again for your time for SITREP and for being so generous with your time and your great interest and love for the Philippines. Do you want to plug any of your work, your social media, and where can people find you? What are you currently working on, etc.?
At this point, what I would say is go out on X, check out the Quad A10 guys through myself. If you'd like to join up, learn how to fight, and learn how to down some Wumao, you're welcome to it. We got a bunch of aces, some guys who really know their stuff and can usually trigger a Wumao or a little pink into making a bad mistake, and they get their account suspended. We post it. We post it proudly.
So thank you once again, Mr. Charles Smith. This has been SITREP PH, the podcast on Philippine affairs and Filipino interests. This has been at Ivan at Home, hosting to you from Manila. And make sure to follow us on our social media for updates on our upcoming podcast, and to visit the catalog of our previous podcasts. We are at SITREP PH on X and on YouTube. Like us also on Facebook at facebook.com/SITREP PH. Philippines, thank you and good night. Mabuhay.